Welcome back, guys. Today I want to do something a bit different here. I want to react to Master Duel Central's new tier list on the best decks for Master 1. I have made such a tier list myself basically this month, or I bring it every month to you within the new pack, the top 5 decks to reach Master 1 with. Then again, it has been a while since I have made a comprehensive tier list, and I might do this in the future when the next pack comes out in September. But now I want to take a look at Master Duel Central here, and we will take a look at his list and what I think of it. Without further ado, let's hop right in.
Tends to change.
And by the way, I have this on 1.25 speed, so because it's a very long video.
Out every month. And I would say at this point, I'm familiar enough with the format to be able to talk about it. So look, as I like to do usually with my tier list, we can start with what I believe to be the top tier. So let's not mess around here. The top tier, in my opinion, is Yubel and Fire King, right? I think we can all agree with that. Yubel, Fire King, best decks in the game. Yubel, being able to set up a monster negate before you really even get into your plays, is pretty terrifying and honestly kind of annoying sometimes. Also, the fact that they have this like Mekanko effect, making it really hard to out them. It's really hard to beat into them because obviously you need to deal with Nightmare Pain, and they can also just crash into whatever board you set up and just go for a game. So that means that going second, they're also really good at baiting out interruption and then just crashing if they can like summon 2 to 3 Yubels on the field and just go for lethal that way. So Yubel, incredibly well situated in my opinion, best deck in ladder. Now do keep in mind these tier lists that I make are always focused on the ladder format. I don't really participate in tournaments. I don't follow them very much, so I'm more so focused on the competitive ladder aspect of Master Duel in general. So just keep that in mind. I don't know for tournaments like if maybe Fire King is better. I don't know if like in a best of 3 format or like having access to siding, if that makes a big difference. That being said, Fire King Snake Eyes is very close, and I would say they're almost interchangeable. Honestly, like I could understand arguments for either deck being the best. Fire King Snake Eyes having pretty much the most insane grind game, plays quite well into Maxi, like not amazing, but you know, you can set up your stuff with fairly few summons if you're just focusing on the Fire King aspect of the deck. Then of course the consistency is there, the combos are there, the ceiling. But the one thing about it is like, you know, Yubel gets a monster negate on field a lot of the time before they even have to get into their plays. That is absolutely insane, getting to just contact fuse a monster negate just like that for free, which like insulates you from hand traps. Whereas Fire King Snake Eyes sometimes will just lose to a hand trap if their hand isn't really equipped to deal with it. This can happen to almost any deck, and it can also happen to Yubel. It's just really crazy that Yubel does have the option sometimes of just setting up a really strong interruption like Phantom of Yubel so early. So that's why I'm edging out Yubel, but I do think like there's arguments for both of these. Now,
yes, I definitely agree with him. So I've talked about this in my top 5 deck tier lists. I guess I have played Fire King Snake Eyes a lot, which is why I personally place this deck at the number 1 spot over Yubel, honestly, especially because of the going second viability of Fire King Snake Eyes. It's really easy. You only need 4 bodies that you can generate quite effectively to kill your opponent. He mentioned the grind game. The grind game is better in my opinion. You always have follow up via your combo that you are doing. And yes, it's a good point that you can establish the Phantom of Yubel early and then are basically insulated from everything that happens. That is true. I also think that the full Yubel board is better than the full Fire King Snake Eyes board, but not by much. I guess all in all, I think that Fire King Snake Eyes is a more rounded deck. So if you would like give it ranks or give it like points on a 1 to 10 scale on different aspects of the deck, I think it would in the end score a bit higher concerning all of the points. At least in my opinion, when it comes to the tournament setting, and I think it makes sense to like rank this for the classic ranking stuff for the ranked ladder and not for tournaments, because most people play ranked and not tournaments. I've been playing tournaments a lot with a Fire King Snake Eyes, and I don't think that the best of 3 makes such a big difference for both of these decks, because I think both of these decks you can't really super well tech against them. I guess you can put in Cosmic Cyclones against Fire King Snake Eyes, but both of the decks, Yubel and Fire King Snake Eyes, are very resistant against being teched against, you could say. So I don't think that the side deck aspect makes a big difference. Obviously, you can side in like Bestials against Yubel, but I don't think that's super impactful, and I have experienced this. So yeah, I definitely agree, though I would put Fire King Snake Eyes above Yubel for now. If we see more Fire King or Snake Eyes hits, then we might have to change this depending on whether Yubel is hit or not. But yeah, establishing a Phantom of Yubel early on is very strong.
We would be moving on to, you know, the other tiers here. The thing is, I think there's another deck that I want to put up here. So in
interesting
S tier, or I guess we'll do it like this. I'll do tier 1, 2, 3, Rogue.
I think there is not another deck in
I do want to
tier
put
1.
tier in tier 1.
No.
I know that's a little goofy, to a lot of people, you might be looking at this like that's crazy, and I know a lot of people say, oh my god,
crazy.
you always have the weirdest takes for your tier list. I think this tier list is really good. You'll see by the end of it. I think without a doubt, we can say Tearlaments is the third best deck in the game. It's extremely represented all over ladder. You know, you can say it's high rolly, but that's not exactly true. It's actually a very, very consistent deck at getting what it needs to get. The high roll aspect comes in more so when like you're bricking or something. If you're bricked on Tearlament, you can high roll, and that can often will just save you from your bad hand. So it's more so like you get a second chance with your high roll. But in reality, Tearlament is actually a super consistent deck. Not to mention, you know, they can play through Maxi extremely well. Their ceiling is definitely the highest out of all three of these decks here. And honestly, like, it's the deck I've been facing the most in Master. I think this deck, I don't know what it is. I understand that Merle's banned and that this deck got hit a bunch of times, but at this point, almost every single mill that you run in Tearlament is strong. The 60 piles are really, really good. The 40 version is also really, really good. I really don't see a world where this is not the third best deck. So if you disagree with the placement of tier 1, I mean, you could say that tier is like tier 1.5, you know, like if you wanted to. I don't want to make a tier 1.5 for a single deck. So yes, I do think this deck is worse than these two, but I do think tier is the third best deck in the game. I think it's extremely well situated within the format right now and really terrifying. It's like their ceiling just doesn't end. And then there's cards like Snow that is still at 3. You know, I could talk on and on about why I think Tearlaments is so broken, but you guys have surely faced them a lot this format. I mean, I see them everywhere in Master Rank. So I feel pretty comfortable putting it here for ladder. It's good going first, good going second, good consistency, ability to like potentially like get going despite having a bad hand just by getting lucky with your mills. Like there's just so much going for this deck. So yeah, I'm putting it in tier 1. You know, let me know what you guys think in the comments.
Interesting. I disagree, I have to say. I would put it in tier 2, I guess. It's definitely not a bad deck. You can still play it, but I think the biggest problem aspect is that it's not that consistent, at least in my opinion. I also didn't face it a lot in Master 1 and also not in the rating duels, I have to say. Then again, I do understand there's a lot of people are playing Bestials right now because a lot of people are playing Voiceless Voice, and Bestials just kill this deck. I would put a lot of decks before Tearlaments, or like a lot of decks, but I would put a lot of decks before Tearlaments just because it's so inconsistent. A good point is that it's really nice into Maxi if you can just go for the Rhino hard play. That's true. But yeah, I think branded Despia, Mathmech, Labyrinth, in my opinion, all decks, and there are more that I would put before I would put Tearlaments.
And now let's do, okay, we'll stick to the higher end stuff just a little longer. I'm not doing another tier 1, don't worry, but I do want to correct a mistake from my last tier list. Branded is still crazy. I'm putting it at top of tier 2, and I was this close to wanting to put it tier 1 because Branded has always been extremely well suited to a best of 1 format, and despite all the hits, despite everything, it has managed to persevere and remain extremely relevant, be it in tournament results, be it in ladder. It's just incredibly strong, dude. Just getting that lock with well, we don't have the gimmick puppet anymore, right? But even if you just do it with the Jowgen, getting the Jowgen plus the trap that negates everything on the field plus like a mirror jade, it just means that like you're guaranteed pretty much to remove whatever normal summon your opponent has to deal with your Jowgen. They're locked down. They basically can't play. It's really, really hard to crack Branded when they're established, and they're also
when they are established.
They have so much gas that a lot of the time, whatever you try to do, like it's just not enough to fully interrupt them. They have like really strong non-targeting removal with like the normal summon or special summon of Albaz using like a fusion deployment. So they have a lot of different tools for different scenarios. They've always, in my opinion, been one of the best decks at a best of 1 format, and I don't know why I started thinking that it was lagging behind in previous tier lists. Clearly, I was wrong. It's just so freaking good. I really don't know what else to say. I know a lot of branded players will try to gaslight me into thinking it's not this good. And, you know, like you guys, you know, you're entitled to your opinion. But at the end of the day, the deck is still getting results after all the hits. And there's a reason for it. It is absolutely insane. So I'm putting branded at top of tier 2. It's just still crazy, you know? Now, in keeping with the theme of just putting every...
My place number 3 almost in every top 5 deck breakdown I make, branded at the top of tier 2. I definitely agree. Yeah, though then again, the setting up the lock is not that easy. If there are hand traps, and normally it doesn't work. Like an Impermanent Ash can be enough to stop that. So that's something to be said. And this deck is definitely less consistent than Yubel and Fire King Snake Eyes, which is why I would never put this in tier 1. This is definitely a tier 2 deck. But as I already said, it's often my number 3 pick.
Thing at the top of their tiers to start off the list. At the top of tier 3, I'm going to be putting Centur-Ion. So Centur-Ion, I think, is like insane. I think a lot of people sleep on how good this deck is. A lot of people like compare it to Voiceless and stuff like that, and I don't think that's really
Voiceless
fair.
is
I think
better.
people are really underestimating how crazy of a card Blazer is. Not to mention they have access to other cards like Crimson Dragon, Resonator Crimson Dragon. Either way, the one that banishes everything on the field. That level 12 Synchro is also really, really good.
Yeah, the Blazer ring is very strong. That's a good point. This is the one that can like negate a special summon or a monster effect and banishes itself and comes back in the end phase. So to do it again, basically, you cannot really interact with this thing. You can't really get rid of it. That's the thing. So in a grind game, that's true, but a lot of decks will just kill you before this one comes back. So I definitely think Voiceless Voice is better, but we will see how he places that.
Into the Yubel matchup. This deck has tools for pretty much everything. Blazer coming back every turn makes it extremely, extremely, extremely hard to win the grind game. Keep in mind, Blazer banishes itself for cost. So even if you negate the Blazer negate on field, they will still get it back at the end phase, which basically means that you either have to shuffle it back into the deck somehow from the banish pile if you have some type of banish manipulation, or you need to find a way to remove it without letting it trigger its negate effect.
Yeah, you can't really get rid of it. That's true.
It's really hard to out.
When it stays, it stays.
And go for lethal, but it is quite hard to achieve. The deck is really resilient. It has a strong grind game with Auxilla, putting the Primera back into the back row every end phase. And again, like, I just think this deck is well situated. It's really, really strong. There's a reason that you see it a lot, and I think it's a little bit slept on. I'm putting it at the top of tier 3. Clearly, it's a good thing that they banned Calamity because this deck does not need it to perform in Master Rank. And now we're going to do the top of...
I think a lot of people are playing this because it's a very fun deck. It's a very cool idea to place stuff in the spell trap zone, as was with Snake Eyes, right? Because they have the same mechanic basically, but Snake Eyes overdid it a bit. And I think this is why we see a lot of Centur-Ion. And I also like the deck. I also like the artwork, and this is another thing, I guess. So putting it at the tier 3, I think this is actually fair. One thing to mention here is that I think Master Duel Central plays a lot of Centur-Ion, and I guess you always rank the deck that you personally play a bit higher, in my opinion. I also rank decks, for example, Mathmech, that I've played a bit higher than other people would, just because I have a lot of experience with the deck, I guess. But I'm totally fine with his tier 3 Centur-Ion stuff.
For Rogue, and for the top of Rogue, I have our brand new Voiceless Voice. I think this deck is a little overrated by a lot of people. I do think there's a lot of good things going for this deck. I played a ton of it. I got to Master Rank with this deck. I ended up adding the Maximus engine, and it was really, really good. And I'm aware that there's a version of this deck that you can play it with branded, which I am interested in trying. And that might make me think that it's a little bit better. Like, I might end up putting it in tier 3 with a branded engine. I'm not trying that yet, just because it looked a little bit scummy. And I wanted to try other different decks in the format. I've been playing a lot of Centur-Ion lately. That being said, Voiceless has some pretty obvious weaknesses right now, mostly because of Yubel. Yubel has a crazy good matchup into Voiceless, which makes it really hard to pick a rogue deck like Voiceless in Master Rank, because you're going to get clapped by Yubel if they go first, because our deck, like, this deck is not great at going second. And then if you're going first and you get established, that's great, but your ceiling is not incredibly high unless you get the absolute full combo. And a lot of the time, Yubel can crack through and just smash into your ritual twice and just call it a day right there. It makes it really, really hard to play this deck in ladder right now. So from my experience with the deck, I really don't think it's well situated. I don't really think you can be anything above Rogue if you have like a really bad matchup into what is obviously the most popular deck in the game, aside from, like, I'd say these two are the most popular decks in the game. Tearlaments and Fire King, not as terrible of a matchup for this deck, but still going second into either of these strategies is really, really rough. Going first, you're most likely to win, I would say, but still, I would say, even though the deck has a lot of obvious strengths, it came into a format where it wasn't really well situated, unfortunately. And finally, the Gatekeeper.
Yeah, interesting. I just wanted to argue against this and say that this is over Centur-Ion, in my opinion. And I think in terms of a raw power level, it is. But then he made a good argument that in this current format, which is very Yubel heavy somehow, it's not that great. And that's true. I guess for this format, I will put it under Centur-Ion, but in the tier 3 category. And at least it's not my personal experience. You can let me know in the comments what is your experience. By the way, if you like my videos, please consider subscribing, hitting thumbs up and the notification bell. This would help out a lot. Thank you. But my experience is that I have faced a lot, especially in rating duels, a lot of Voiceless Voice, which is why I started to play Bastilles and everything. And not a lot of Yubel, honestly. So yeah, in a world where Yubel is being played a lot, I agree that Voiceless Voice isn't that great. But in general, I think Voiceless Voice has more potential than Centur-Ion, but not in the current metagame. I agree, yeah.
Before Rogue, I'm putting Momento in Playable. I think Momento, you know, is a great deck. It has a lot of good things going for it. It has strong one-card combos, good consistency. The one
will
thing
become
is
good in the
combos are pretty
future.
long-winded and quite easy to interrupt once your opponent knows where to negate.
Yeah, that's
because
true.
of that, I feel like until we get the support, it's not very realistic to put Momento above Playable. It literally loses to one interruption if your opponent knows what they're doing. You negate the fusion, most of the time that ends the turn. Even negating the Kelpie, I think it's called, the horse. Negating the horse ends the turn pretty much every time.
Tutsi
So because of that, I would say,
something like this.
It's good, it's solid, but it's not quite rogue. When we get the support, it might even go up to like tier 3 or tier 2 though. So I'm looking forward to that. I really like Momento. I think it's going to get a lot better. Now, I will say I did this.
I would put this in rogue and this in tier 3, but yeah, I guess if you like see it like this, then it's fair. Yeah, Memento has a lot of weak points, unfortunately, and with the new support, especially with the Fiendsmith support, I think this could be become like a bottom tier 1, top tier 2 deck then with Fiendsmith, right?
Fat for this tier list because I find a lot of my tier lists I'm talking about a lot of like pretty irrelevant decks. So like I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna focus on decks that I'm actually seeing in ladder or decks that are worth like discussing because
fair point.
Support in the latest set.
There's just too much otherwise.
We're not gonna overcrowd the list with a bunch of decks that I haven't even seen, and I'm like kind of trying to guess where I would like situate them.
Like
so
virtual world or
let's
something.
Get into it. This one, you know, just got a support. We got Ice Barrier over here. Obviously, Ice Barrier is not tier 1. It's not the best, you know, it's not the best. In fact, I would probably put it below Memento in Playable.
Sure.
It's you know,
same.
Yeah, Raiho's a good card, and you know, it's kind of a glass cannon deck. If you get set up with your Lancia, that might be enough. You know, Lancia summon Raiho, it might do the job. It might. It's just that oftentimes it won't, and oftentimes you'll have to go second, and that's when you're really going to feel the pain. Sure, you know, it has some strong cards.
Yeah, the deck is not great. It was good in the event, but
not enough to
not
play with the big leagues. It also plays really poorly into Maxi, as well as a bunch of other weaknesses that you'll see with a lot of these like combo synchro decks. So, oh yeah, that's something I forgot to mention about like both Centur-Ion and Voiceless. Actually, these two play pretty well into Maxi.
Yeah, especially Voiceless.
But yeah, no, Ice Barrier plays really poorly into
another
Maxi.
Point to put it in tier 3 in my opinion.
It's not
at least, maybe
not
in tier 2.
Terrible, but it's definitely not
Bottom.
rogue. So we're gonna leave it here.
Yep, I agree.
Do the same thing for Goaty. I think Goaty is you know, it got its support. It helps a lot. It's still a 2-card combo deck that, you know, if it doesn't get set up turn 1, like the entire deck crumbles, and it's pretty easy to interrupt this deck and stop it from getting set up on turn 1, at which point you're really just grasping at straws with this deck. Now, if you do get set up, your grind game is actually really, really strong, and, you know, it can be kind of hard to stop this deck once it really gets going. That being said, it's probably a bit too slow for the current format, and I just don't think it's very well situated. Not to mention that both of these decks don't like facing Yubel at all, so yeah, that's where I'm going to leave it for that, and that's about it.
I am not the biggest expert on Goaty, I have to say, but I kind of disagree. I rarely ever see this, and I don't think it's super strong. But I'm also not sure what a Goaty even wants to achieve. If I'm going to be honest.
For the playables here, I'm not going to be putting more decks in here because there's a ton of decks that are playable in this game, and
I
want to talk about every single deck. That
could also put Dark Magician in there then,
and you could get to Master 1 with it. It'll just be like a really uphill battle. I'm sure you guys have your own pet decks that you know could do it. It's just going to be challenging, right? So you can include those in this tier right here. Next up, let's do Stun. I think Stun is really good. Stun is really, really good into Yubel. It's really, really good into basically every good deck. So yeah, you're going first, you love it. You're going second, you don't love it.
Yeah.
This won't end up being like a top of tier 3 mostly because of that. It is mostly a deck that, you know, wants to go first, get established, and win very easily. Now, one of the things that makes it a really good pick for Master Rank is that you lose quickly and you win very quickly as well. Like, you know, very early into a duel if you're losing or winning. So that's kind of nice, you know, in Master Duel because you're doing so many duels to have a deck where like your opponent is scooping like less than 2 minutes into the duel if you get fully established with stun and they don't draw the out. Your turn takes like 30 seconds when you're going first, and if you're going second, you can tell like 30 seconds into your opponent's turn if you should keep like if you should stick around or if you should just go next, you know. So
will be the same with Tenpai.
Honestly, this whole format feels a bit more coin flip based than some of the prior formats. I would say like it really feels like going first is extremely important right now. I think that's in no small part because of UL being a deck that you really don't want to let get established on turn 1. So you know it's not that different from other decks right now to have a deck that relies on going first. So yeah, I think stun at tier 3 makes a lot of sense. Now another deck
for me, it's a rogue deck because of the fact that going second is so bad. And yeah, I think a lot of stuff here in the engine can also out some of the stuff from this stun deck variant here, especially this normal summon isn't really that you can quickly kill it, not with Yubel, but with other decks. So I will put it in rogue because of this bad going second thing. But otherwise, the point about getting having fast games, that's a good point, especially if you want to climb, I don't know, rating duels. It might make sense to use this deck.
That we're going to be putting in here. Let's do Mathmech. So Mathmech,
yeah, now it's getting interesting.
Tier 3. I think this deck is still really solid. I mean, it didn't lose that much. It has that insane Cyber's consistency. It has one of the best going second turns in the whole game. But unlike Stun, it's weak to a good amount of hand traps. You know, sure, you run a lot of outs to hand trap, but that doesn't mean you don't care about them, you know? So like something like a Maxi is something you really don't want to see when you're playing Mathmech, especially the modern builds of Mathmech. Now, it's not necessarily the end of the world to get Maxi'd with Mathmech. Even if you don't have the out, you know, you can like kind of pass on Super Factorial and an IP Masquerena, and that can certainly do it, you know, and you're giving your opponent, you know, like 3 to 4 draws, which isn't ideal, but you know, you're still potentially standing a chance. It's just like your odds are pretty low, you know. Doing just that going first now might not be enough for the amount of gas that like modern decks have. That being said, going second, Mathmech still has one of the best going second turns in the game, and so I think it's pretty well situated at tier 3, not to mention, you know, the consistency, the space for hand traps, and all these things. There's still a lot of things going for Mathmech, despite, you know, its couple of weaknesses. I also don't want to put it too high because people started playing Bestials again. I've been seeing Bestials a lot more, probably because Tearlament has gone so popular recently.
In my opinion, because of Voiceless Voice. I have faced a lot of Voiceless Voice, but and no Tearlaments, but
you know,
yeah.
They still hate Bestials. You still want to
make that argument.
Bestialed. And so, yeah, I'm going to leave it at tier 3. I still think it's really strong. I'm putting Stun above just because Stun doesn't really care about most hand traps, if any, honestly. So yeah, I'm leaving it as is. Next up, we are going to go.
Yeah, I would put this at the bottom of tier 2, honestly. It's a fair point that a lot of people are citing in Bestials, and if they do, or putting in Bestials if they do, that's a problem for Mathmech. But Mathmech is just insanely strong. I guess, in my opinion, stronger than Centur-Ion at the moment. If Centur-Ion or when Centur-Ion gets the new support waves, that could change. But yeah, I would put this bottom of tier 2 if there are not like Bestials in every deck. Yeah, that's for sure. That's a big weakness point for Mathmech.
Spright is solid. It's not a bad deck by any means. You know, a lot of people playing the Mosquito.
Runic Spright is not bad, but yeah,
bodies. That being said, obviously the Mosquito play not super good into Yubel. Actually, like, you know, Spright not that great at dealing with Yubel in general. There are variants of Spright that play Yubel, like they play like the field spell, you know, and some basic Yubel stuff. And I've seen that, and I've lost to it. So, you know, I'm not saying it's bad or anything. I just don't think it really would be fair to put it above Rogue. Still loses to all the same stuff that a lot of Rogue decks do. If it gets Maxi'd, you're passing on so little that you might as well like scoop almost, unless your opponent is like totally bricked, or you just pass on nothing and just hope that they don't have the cards that they need to actually play. Also, like the ceiling isn't the best ever. Spright doesn't have a bad ceiling. It just kind of has like a mid ceiling, I would say. Like its combo ends up setting up a pretty good board. Nothing too crazy, nothing too oppressive, which like does the job a lot of the time. And again, I do think you can get to Master 1 with Spright. It's just an uphill battle. I think the one thing making me put it in Rogue especially, well, actually, for one, it's not nearly as interruptible as the decks in Playable, you know, like it can actually play through interruption. And also going second, that Shadow Mosquito is a big deal. Like Ninja Mosquito is a really, really strong card. So because of that, because of their ability to go second, either use Gamma Burst or the Mosquito, depending on the board or the situation, I think it's pretty fair to put Spright right here in Rogue. Next up,
Yeah, I will put it in tier 3, but I've talked about this. I would put Memento in Rogue, Voices in tier 3, maybe bottom tier 2, and then Spright in tier 3. But I agree with all of his arguments. Spright is basically still very strong, but in comparison to the new decks that have arrived, not that big of a banger anymore. And tier was always stronger, so I agree. I definitely agree on tier being higher than Spright. By the way, tier, where would I put tier? I definitely would put tier at the bottom of tier 2, behind decks like Mathmech and Branded.
Let's do Floowandereeze. I'm going to put Floowandereeze in tier 3 under Mathmech.
That's so bad.
They got some support recently.
Yeah,
actually.
the support is not
we
that
haven't talked about
bad,
them yet, but Raid Raptors have a new flash spell. I forget what it's called right now, but it works very, very similar to the Floowandereeze Adventure flash spell.
Swallow's
it's like
Cowrie.
almost the same. So basically now Floowandereeze has 6 chances of dodging Imperm or Veiler, other than, you know, like the cross out and the call by and stuff like that. So they have 6 extra chances to have a way to dodge those types of targeted interruption, or they can just use those cards also to add consistency to the deck. So that boost in consistency from those 3 extra flash spells, I think, make a pretty damn huge difference for Floowandereeze. Also, like, Floowandereeze Book of Moon effect with their trap card is super strong against the meta, especially these 2 right here. Not that amazing.
The Dimension Shifter is very strong against the meta.
Matchups for Floowandereeze in this meta, but still, I think Floowandereeze is pretty well situated right now. I'm not a fan of Floowandereeze. A lot of people know this, but I'm not going to start like lying to you. You know, I do think it's a strong deck right now. Not a bad pick at all. Now, we've been hanging out in...
I will put this in Rogue, but I think the strongest point for Floowandereeze is Dimension Shifter, and the fact that Shifter is very nice into everything that is on the top spot here.
Tier 3 and Rogue and all that for quite a bit, so let's throw in a really strong deck here, but a deck I did overrate quite a bit in my last tier list, and that would be Rescue Ace. I'm going to put Rescue Ace in tier 2, okay. And yeah, I was wrong about this deck. I'm going to be honest with you guys. Yeah, Rescue Ace Snake Eyes, while I still think it is a really strong deck, and yes, plays really well into Maxi, and your odds of being able to imperm the Turbulence with IP in the format are pretty low.
SP.
The thing is, this deck still runs a lot of non-engine cards that you need to run to get your payoff.
Yeah,
I'm talking about all those traps and spells that you're running for Rescue Ace that don't really like serve you going first. So a lot of the time you'll be drawing those traps and you will not be drawing combo. You can get some really awkward hands when you're playing Rescue Ace. And then the fact that they put the Airlifter to 2, meaning that your absolute best normal summon in the deck is now at 2 when you have way lower odds of drawing it, is really, really rough. Not to mention all the other hits.
It's
too,
basically
like,
at 3 because of reinforcements of the army, but yeah.
Rescue Ace, right? So like for example, Wanted going to 1 is a pretty big hit actually to Rescue Ace, you know, so those hits end up affecting Rescue Ace as well. So I do feel like I overestimated this deck last time. I did put it in tier 1, and I want to admit I was wrong. It's not tier 1. I still think it's tier 2. I still think it's a really, really strong deck. Don't get me wrong. I just think
in the middle of tier 2 somewhere. I agree.
Still, not a bad pick by any means, and you absolutely can get to Master 1 with this deck. But I'd say it plays better into Maxi than even Tearlament. So that's a pretty big deal. But anyway, moving on.
I don't think it plays better into Maxi than Tearlaments. But yeah, I agree. It's like a mid-tier 2 deck, that's for sure. The hits, I hate this deck. I don't know why. The hits are definitely, I've definitely hurt the deck, especially the Snake Eye stuff in terms of consistency. And the brick part is a very true part. But yeah, mid-tier 2 deck, I would agree.
Got a lot of decks that I want to put in Rogue, so I'm going to start attacking those a little bit here. I think Naturia Horus is a Rogue deck right now. You know, don't sleep on Naturia Horus. It's still good. You can just go watch my last deck profile on it from a while back, as the deck didn't really change much. You know, yeah, we lost Calamity. Doesn't matter. Now our game plan is more straightforward. We don't even have to think about level 12 synchros. We don't even care about level 12 synchros actually in this deck. You know, it just it plays super great into Maxi, which is a big reason I think that it's really good. It has good control. It doesn't put up crazy big bodies, which actually is a pretty big deal, because putting up massive bodies is a pretty big weakness when it comes to facing Yubel. And you know, it sets up some really strong interruption. Infinite spell negates is massive this format. It's really, really strong. As you can see, a lot of the best decks in the game right now are using a ton of really important spells. So yeah, Naturia Beast, really, really strong card this format. I think that alone makes it at least Rogue. I'm not putting it above Rogue, however, because it does suffer from sometimes having awkward hands, especially drawing the Sunflower. Just like, that's a really bad Garnet a lot of the time. And you know, there's also just the fact that the ceiling isn't always crazy high. It can be high if you have like a good hand, but sometimes your hand is not amazing and your ceiling is like a Naturia Beast and like a Link Haribo plus like 2 monster negates on opponent's turn, which it's not bad, you know, it's strong, but it's not necessarily game winning. Also, a lot of decks can just straight up go beat over Naturia Beast pretty easily. So like, that's also kind of an issue. So yeah, I'm not putting it higher than this, but I do think it's kind of slept on. I think it's a good deck. Maybe even better than this, honestly, like Loki, but whatever. I'll leave it here. All right, this one's kind of a tough one. I like never see this, but let's just do pure Kashtira. Now, most of the time, if you're seeing Kashtira in this game, it is not the Kashtira deck. It is Kashtira cards in Tearlament, or it's Kashtira cards in pure Snake Eyes, which is not the same as this one. It will be on the list, don't worry. But yeah, usually when you see Kashtira, it's one of those. So it's very, very rare that you actually see pure Kashtira, but a lot of people still do play it. I think one cool thing about Kashtira is it's actually a very beginner-friendly deck, or like it's friendly to people returning to Yu-Gi-Oh! Because its game plan is pretty straightforward. You know, it has a solid turn 2 all in all. It's a strong deck, but it has lost quite a bit of consistency with a Unicorn going to 1. So yeah, I don't think it's like the best situated deck ever. I also think Dimensional Fissure, while it is really strong against Tearlament and Fire King, Dimensional Fissure doesn't do much against Yubel, which does kind of hold a deck like this back. You know, like activating Shifter or activating D-Fissure doesn't really stop you from getting a pretty strong board established in Yubel. So for that reason, I'm going to leave it here. I still think it's good. Not much else to say about Kashtira, honestly.
I would disagree here, because if you D-Fissure, you don't only D-Fissure, you have other stuff on the field. I will put Kashtira as well as the Naturia stuff definitely in tier 3. Kashtira definitely here somewhere at the top. I think if you argue that stun is very great, then I don't understand why you don't put Kashtira somewhere up here, because Kashtira also is kind of stunny, is kind of like a remove everything from the board stun version. You can play Dimension Shifter in this deck, which is very strong. So if we put the Floowandereeze here, we definitely have to put Kashtira in front of Floowandereeze, in my opinion, and also in front of the stun version. I would definitely put Kashtira here in front of that. We can keep Centur-Ion here. I don't necessarily disagree. And then I would put the Naturia combo, Runic, Horus, whatever stuff also here in a tier 3. This is definitely better than stuff like Momento, because, and he said this already, Momento can be stopped quite effectively, but Kashtira is very nice and definitely acts well with all of the top tier decks here, especially Tearlaments. It's nice against the Fire King stuff, because Unicorn ripping like the Promethean Princess from the extra deck is very disruptive. And then also against Yubel, the fact that the Kashtira Arisat can just, or banishes every card is very bad for all of these decks. And going second, it's also not that bad. Then again, it's true, Kashtira Unicorn being at 1 is very, very bad, but we can replace this Kashtira stuff with more stun stuff, and this still works. I think this is kind of a solid deck that not a lot of people are playing, and it is very beginner friendly, that is true.
So we're just going to move on. All right, so this next deck here is pretty much always rogue, so I might as well just do it right now. Heroes are rogue. Big surprise. Big freaking surprise,
yeah,
right?
I agree.
Heroes are rogue. You could also call it a combo stun.
This is a rogue deck, but better than Momento. It's better than Momento.
And potentially a Imperial Order, depending on the build that you're playing. It's strong. It has really good combos, has good consistency, has a ton of gas. And if you don't know what to negate, you know, you might be in trouble. Now, every hero player always tells me, just negate Vion and you win. And I'm going to tell you right now, every time I negate Vion, that doesn't win me the game.
Is Vion the guy that can grab the fusion card?
So if
it goes to the graveyard,
I think there might be some type of conspiracy where hero players are just lying to everyone about what
they are lying to him. So he wastes his hand traps.
Losing to them so much, but they're low-key the
new conspiracy theory.
They're also really, really good going second.
Activated.
A ton of gas to be able to play through interruption. I think it's a really, really solid rogue deck with some pretty big choke points. Next up, let's do some more rogue. You know, let's just we got to knock them out. I got a lot of rogue decks in here, so we'll do these two at the same time because they are here for the exact same reason, and that would be Raid Raptors as well as Blackwing. Basically, with the new Raid Raptor support, both of these decks have become Kali Yuga machines. They make Kali Yuga extremely easily. That being said, just negating Raid Raptors, no, his name is Raider's Knight. So negating Raider's Knight oftentimes will just kill the Kali Yuga line.
The game,
I'd say like low-key, maybe the Blackwing variant of Kali Yuga is actually maybe even stronger, but I only have like one person that I know that plays Blackwing, and that would be High Niner, who got to master one like in a day when the support came out. So that's the main reason I'm including Blackwings in here. So shout out to High Niner. And I will say, you know, Kali Yuga is a hell of a card. It's Calamity Lock, right? You can't sleep on Calamity Lock, but Yubel does not care about towers. And both of these decks, the only thing they do other than Kali Yuga locking is pretty much dropping some big ass towers on the field. And yeah, Yubel is just going to smack into those towers and win the game. They have a really bad matchup into Yubel overall, I would say. Again, I'm not even convinced that Blackwing is worst. Part of me thinks Blackwing might actually be better, but I'm just going to go off of the fact that I've seen Raid Raptor more, and I'm going to put Blackwing below it. But yeah, give me your thoughts in the comments about this. But yeah, I do think this deck might actually be better. But anyway, we're going to move on from this. Towers into Yubel format, not good. Let's move on. We got
Pearly, by the way,
over here. And oh my god, my list is getting really tight.
Labyrinth,
I'm gonna put
Pearly still missing. Very
rogue. The thing about Dynamorphia is, yeah, you know, it's solid when it gets established. It's really, really hard to beat. But
pure Snake Eyes.
Yeah, all your Yubel monsters have 0 attack. So because the monsters
I also had a very fun Yubel against Dynamorphia game that took me so long. It went on for so long. But yeah, I definitely agree putting these 3 decks here in Rogue. If the Raid Raptor stuff can go through or the Blackwing stuff can go through, this can just be game, but they are so susceptible to a single hand trap, which the top decks are running a lot of hand traps. They have a lot of space, which is why they are the top decks, because they can just interrupt the other decks so effectively. So this can, in this current format, not be more than a rogue deck. And Dynamorphia, same thing basically. Dynamorphia may be a bit better than these two because it always has this surprise factor where your deck sometimes just can't deal with this. But then again, going second with Dynamorphia is just bad.
All at 0 attack. That basically means Rexstorm can't negate them. And since you can't negate the monsters,
you have this very strange Yubel matchup,
Rexstorm, which is a massive body, and just go for game. That means this deck has a really, really bad matchup into Yubel, and that's a big deal. It's not even a kind of bad matchup. It's a really bad matchup. Also, I mean, it's not like Labyrinth, right? Labyrinth can kind of play on turn 0, and, you know, that's kind of crazy. Also, like, Labyrinth in general is just a better going second deck, I would say, than Dynamorphia.
Yes.
So, yeah, I cannot put Dynamorphia any higher, but I do think it's a real deck that you can consider. You know, it's not a bad deck by any means.
Give us Labyrinth now. Tier 2
Labyrinth. Every time I
Labyrinth.
face Dynamorphia, I lose to it, so I have to include it. But yeah, it does have some pretty big downsides. Now, I'm not speaking from experience here. I was just talking to Scorp on my Discord, who has played a good amount of Dynamorphia, and he was kind of giving me his reasoning for it, mostly because, like, I mean, I really can't speak for Dynamorphia.
I think it's really cool that he, like, involves his community in these tier lists.
Yeah, so that's it for Dynamorphia. Next up, we can do...
Because sometimes you just don't play these decks, and then you can't really rank it.
It's like at the bottom of tier 3. Yeah, I do think it's under Floowandereeze, which might look a little bit
weird.
The thing is, like, both of these decks, they really don't like Droll.
Floowandereeze is so bad.
There are hands where you can play through Droll with Pearly, whereas I guess Floowandereeze kind of hard loses to Droll. But even despite that, I mean, Floowandereeze doesn't care about Max C. Pearly absolutely does. I know people love to pretend that Pearly doesn't care about Max C. That is not true. If you activate a flash spell and then your opponent activates Max C, you have a play around Max C, which is to activate another flash spell, and then you have to discard a card to get a summon out of your deck. So you're going like -2 just to stop your opponent from drawing one card.
Yeah, but you can also just make your play that you want to make with just giving your opponent 2 cards. You make the Black Cat and then the Black Cat into Sleepy Memory, and then you pass turn on the trap card, because there are only 2 summons, only 2 cards that you have to give him to end up on your tower's boss monster. So it's not that bad into Max C. Yeah, this play he describes right now isn't that great, but Pearly is definitely a tier 2 deck, especially because you have this Towers monster that is not only a Towers monster like in Blackwing or in Raid Raptor, but this is also a Towers monster that can interact with your opponent and spin stuff back. So Pearly definitely, if you can't out the Towers monster, you can't out the Towers monster, and the Towers monster can spin stuff like, for example, a Yubel stuff that would crash into it, can just spin it back. Pearly is definitely a mid tier 2 deck, and way better than Floowandereeze and all the stuff that you see right here.
Or if you really want to fully commit, you can activate 2 more flash spells and discard 2 cards and actually just completely empty your hand to get 2 summons.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense. At that point,
like, if your opponent has any hand traps other than Max C, like, you completely lost, right? Like,
it's bad against the it's bad against like 2 hand traps. That's true.
Like, with
but
that's
that's
now they have those 6
true for
flash
every
spells
deck,
that allow them to dodge after a normal summon. So like, if you have Imperm or Valor into Floowandereeze, there's a high likelihood that after you activate them, they can just dodge, right? So yeah, I feel like Floowandereeze and Pearly are both similar in the sense that when they get established turn 1, they're extremely strong and they have a good amount of consistency at getting established. But then there's the fact that Floowandereeze doesn't care about Max C, and also the fact
and the going
that
second of Pearly is way better.
Bad at going second. Like, I think Pearly and Floowandereeze are just downright atrocious at going second.
No, Pearly's good.
I know like Pearly has tools technically, like they have, you know, happiness and stuff like that. But really, with the resources, the fact that every time you activate a card, you have to discard a card with the flash spells and everything, like, you should, against Pearly, if you're established, you should be able to completely stop them from basically doing anything if you have any clue what you're doing, which is definitely going to be the case if you're playing in Master Rank. So I just don't think it's a very well situated deck overall. But yeah, well, that's not true. I do think it's still a very strong option. I just don't think it's quite as well situated as it was in past formats with the popularity of Duel and just, you know, the fact that big tower monster Yubel, not good. And next up, let's do Pure Snake Eyes. I think it's better than the Rescue Ace variant.
Yes.
Pure Snake Eyes really just means Snake Eyes with Kashtira cards right now.
Yes,
and,
I agree.
They're going to pass on. They're going to like set up the Formula Synchron to be able to make Baron de Fleur on your turn. If they go absolutely full gas combo, they'll actually get a Savage and a Baron and also the IP and all this stuff.
And follow up.
So it can be really, really terrifying to go up against this deck. It technically has a higher ceiling than the Fire King Snake Eyes variant. The problem is that it plays worst into Max C and also just generally has like worse consistency now that the Snake Eyes aspect of the deck has been hit so much. The Fire King aspect of this deck helps it tremendously at still getting established when, you know, your Snake Eyes stuff gets ashed or if you just didn't draw into it. So yeah, I still think it's a really, really strong deck. Obviously, it's high tier 2.
Yes, my number 4 basically behind Branded makes sense, or maybe you could even argue before Branded. Honestly,
right now, I actually think we're in a pretty good format in terms of like the amount of decks you can play that are going to perform well.
That's true.
I don't think the decks in tier 3 are necessarily going to do poorly or anything like that. I think you're going to do great with pretty much every single one of these decks. It's just going to be a bit more of an uphill battle with the ones maybe in like tier 3 and slightly so in tier 2. But honestly, in tier 2, it's not going to feel that much different. These decks are insanely strong. The deck that I'll put at the bottom of tier 2 is Labyrinth. And we're going to end the list on Labyrinth. I actually also had Salamangreat, but we ran out of space. So I'll just tell you right now, I was going to put
Salamangreat is definitely a tier 3 deck.
Is a strong rogue deck, but weaker than Mathmech in pretty much every way, other than the fact that
yes. But it's tier 3. It's definitely better than Floowandereeze. But Floowandereeze, I think, is my biggest disagreement point with Master Duel Central.
Not put it on the list at all. But yeah, back to Labyrinth, the deck that we're ending the video on. Yeah, so
it's been a long video, right? He has made like a 36 minutes
tier 2. And I don't
tier list. This is a funny thing for everyone who's still here, which statistically speaking are not a lot of people. Like 92% of people just are done with the video after like 8 minutes or something. That's at least the statistics. And I can't imagine that he has like so much different statistics than me in such a big way. So crazy to make so long videos.
Very well.
The community just doesn't watch them, in my opinion, in my experience.
There's a lot of things going against statistically speaking. Right now. It's not to say that it doesn't have tools. It is a very, very strong deck. Definitely the best trap deck in the game.
But I agree with Labyrinth on the bottom here, on the bottom of tier 2. I guess with this we can end the video. It's been very long already nearly 40 minutes. But yeah, I agree here. I've talked about the points where I disagree with him, especially Tearlaments, especially Floowandereeze. I would put Pearly higher. I would put Kashtira higher. I would put this one higher. Also this one, I think these two here definitely aren't really fitting. But all in all, I have to say that this is a good list, and obviously I would put Snake Eyes Viking over Yubel. But honestly, I think this is a good list, a very solid one with good arguments made, so I definitely like it. But let me know in the comments what do you think of this list here. Let me know, and let me also know if you want me to make like my own list when the new pack comes out. Let me know in the comments. Thanks for being here, and we will see each other in the next one.